Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to this joint webinar with our partner OneTrust. Together we'll have two speakers, Efrain Castañeda from OneTrust and Fergal McHugh from Arekibo. We'll begin with a short introduction to OneTrust and general cookie compliance with Efrain, and then it will be followed up by a panel discussion together with Fergal. So I'm passing on straight to Efrain.
The first part of the presentation is a bit of an introduction to OneTrust for those of you who don't know us, and just a bit of news, what's been happening around the world of cookies in the past 30 days, as well as some updates concerning some of the complaints we have been hearing about, such as real-time bidding and what the report from the Belgian DPA. So just a little intro about us. Fergal is head of strategy at Arekibo. He is responsible for overseeing their innovation and growth strategies. He works with Arekibo's customers in Ireland and Europe, and he advises on how to integrate and scale digital innovation into their organizations. Arekibo in Ireland are the largest digital platform agency. They design and build the platforms to help organizations accelerate and secure their investment in the digital context. And they work with PLC, enterprise and public organizations to develop a true partnership model that delivers a 24/7, 365 days a year service. OneTrust, on the other hand, is the number one fastest growing and most widely used technology platform to help organizations be more trusted and to make all those compliance requirements operational in terms of privacy, security, data governance, and compliance programs. I am the co-host of this webinar. I'm a privacy counsel at OneTrust with expertise in law and technology. I have a 6-year focus on data protection at the EU level. At the moment, I focus mostly on digital consent and tracking technologies, albeit I have a lot of involvement when it comes to international data transfers and every other topic from data protection that may overlap with the processing of personal data with the use of tracking technologies such as cookies, or the newer or different tracking technologies that we are seeing nowadays, such as beacons, web beacons, audio beacons, video beacons, etc. So for those of you who don't know us, we are the largest technology platform for privacy, security, and risk governance in worldwide. We have the largest database of regulatory research. We get daily privacy, security, and compliance alerts from 40 plus in-house experts that we have within our OneTrust Data Guidance division. We have over 40 analysts that are every day following all the news that we can find around the world. They update our news feed on real time. I, as a privacy counsel at OneTrust, I use data guidance on a daily basis to answer simple questions such as what happened to the latest draft of the privacy regulation, all the way to finding out what the different opinions and approaches are, for example, international data transfers after the Schrems II decision. We are the world's largest, we have the world's largest number of certified professionals. Most of us working at OneTrust are certified privacy professionals, either certified international privacy professionals in Europe or in the US, or certified privacy managers, certified privacy technologists. We, I'd say, more than 90% of the workforce at OneTrust is a certified privacy professional, which gives us huge leverage when it comes to implementing our solution, when it comes to generating ideas, that we can all generate ideas and share with the rest of the team, including for R&D, to include new features in the platform. So the fact that everyone from the sales reps to the lawyers to the developers have some sort of certification makes it quite a solid proposal, our product. And we have the largest active community of best practices. We share best practices online, doing these types of events. We also hold our Connect series, Privacy Connect, Cookie Connect, and we recently had our Trust Week, which was a success, was the biggest conference that we organize on privacy. Before, we used to call it Privacy Tech. Now it's a Trust Week where we run from workshops to keynotes to roundtables, where you can get in touch with the community and share ideas where things are blurry or a bit vague, as it sometimes happens in privacy world, especially when in the context of cookies and tracking technologies. Now, getting a bit into the topic, this is intended to be a short 15-minute, 10 to 15 minutes news about what's been going on around Europe. So last time we hosted this webinar with Arekibo, we focused on the Irish DPC. So I'm going to start with the Irish DPC just to remind you, the Irish DPC's newer guidelines are already in force. I believe they came into force on the 5th of October. So we all have to comply with those guidelines if we have activity in Ireland or if we target the Irish market, even if we're not established in Ireland. And what was interesting about the Irish DPC's guidelines was that they were the result of a massive sweep that they undertook in 2019. So they actively went out, took a sample of controllers that were using tracking technologies, deploying them on their websites, and they carried out an in-depth audit to understand how well they were gathering their consent, whether it was a lawful way of gathering consent, whether they were gathering consent when they needed to, instead of using other lawful bases like legitimate interest. So all this resulted in the DPC pinning down some of the issues that were that the market seemed to have been struggling with. They offered guidance. Most of the controllers that they sampled responded to their questions. So they undertook desk research. They asked a few questions to the controllers involved, and they also went about browsing the websites and trying to see if their answers were in line with what the websites actually did. They found confusion. They found some controllers being non-compliant for various reasons, to which they were flexible if they were proactive in changing or updating the website. So in one case, one of the controllers was proactively changing their website. I think they were revamping all of it. So the DPC was flexible in that they were, when at the time of the sweep, they were already intending to change these websites. So we have to keep a close eye into the DPC's guidelines. They are strict. They follow a similar trend to that of the French guidelines, a bit stricter than the ICO, I would say, especially when it comes to the position of cookie walls and the position of analytics cookies. Mostly, and this is something that has been a common feature for these three data protection authorities that I have on the screen: the Spanish AEPD, the Irish DPC, and CNIL in France. The three of them have focused heavily on consent. So CNIL also released the newer recommendations. So the recommendations are tied to the guidelines that they produced last year. So I don't know if you may remember that the CNIL issued their draft recommendations early this year. I believe it was in January. They were open for public consultation. And right after public consultation came a decision from the Conseil d'État overturning CNIL's outright ban on cookie walls. The Conseil d'État's argument was CNIL did not have that sort of legislative authority to create such a generic universal ban on something. So the Conseil d'État told CNIL to rephrase the way in which they were approaching cookie walls. They issued their recommendations with a few very interesting specifics, such as nowadays in France, for what I understand, although they don't say it explicitly with these words, but lack of interaction with a banner, or closing a banner, a cookie banner I'm talking about, or closing a cookie banner by clicking on the X button, or simply just keep on browsing without minding the cookie banner, has to result in two different things. Number one, the cookie banner has to disappear. And number two, we have to interpret that as website operators as implied rejection of all tracking technologies, except for the strictly necessary, obviously, which are there for the website to function. So we cannot deploy by CNIL's standards any tracking technologies that have not been actively consented to by clicking on the I accept button or by going to and customize the user settings on the preference center. Another interesting thing from CNIL is that they, I think, well, to my knowledge, are the first in recognizing the fact that, well, the industry is developing cross-device consent or cross-device preference for cross-device, cross-domain, and cross-application consent or preference. So this means that for those implementing that type of management, of consent management, the users, when they consent or change their preferences on a website, this would or could be signaled to throughout these users' devices, which implies obviously device identification, a bit of fingerprinting, and and obviously across domains or across apps that are owned by the same publisher or by the same developer. However, Cadil, recognizing the fact that it is there and people are talking about this feature more and more, because obviously one of the advantages that cross-device, cross-domain, cross-app consent has is that we avoid consent fatigue from the user. That's one of the examples I could give. However, going back to my points, that Camille said explicitly that cross-device consent, although it could be a very useful feature, it is not allowed when it comes to third-party tracking technologies that aim at personalization. So creating profiles, delivering targeted ads, or creating profiles of users. And then on the other hand, we have the AEPD, the Spanish Data Protection Agency, which have been a bit vague in the interpretation of their cookie regime, the cookie regime in Spain. And what you can see with them is that they had some sort of implied consent prior to the summer of this year, and then the European Data Protection Board issued their opinion on consent, which explicitly rejects implied consent, such as the lack of it, like the opposite of what Camille has. So the lack of interaction with the banner would be consent. Further browsing, getting into content, further into content or subdomains of the same website would be considered as consent, to which the Data Protection Agency in Spain had to update their own guidelines to reflect what the European Data Protection Board their stance on how to lawfully obtain consent from users. They still leave some leeway for some implied consent. Say, for example, you want to activate a chatbot, which is not strictly necessary for the functioning of a website. Therefore, you wouldn't drop it from the outset. The cookie is needed for the chatbot to exist. But if you click and open that chatbot, then that's some sort of implied consent. So you're consenting to the cookies that will be dropped if you start interacting with that chat. So, which to me is a bit redundant, because this could be solved with, by the Purpose 1, Article 5 of the Privacy Directive. You consent to tracking technologies despite of the nature of the data. However, the Spanish Data Protection Agency has been a bit vague about consent, also about cookie walls. There is some leeway. Cookie walls, something interesting. I'll get to that in the next slide. One of the news that I see around the cookie world and what's happening with cookie walls is that whereas by mid-2018, the trend from data protection authorities we see was outright bans of cookie walls. Now, some data protection authorities are changing their stance on cookie walls. We may even have to find a new name. So cookie wall means that you can't access a website unless you consent to everything that I want to drop on your device. So you have no choice, right? That's why it's a wall. However, the industry, at the same time as the regulators, have been nuancing this position. For example, in Germany, you can see this new model whereby some publishers will give you the option to pay with data or pay with cash if you want to access the content on their website. So pay with data means you will get ads, most likely targeted ads, most likely you're giving away data so they can profile you and obviously bid with their ad tech vendors your personal information. So regardless of whether it's because the industry is developing something new or because the DPAs are finding ways to coping with balancing out what the industry needs and what the user needs, meaning in terms of cookie walls, we can see now a more nuanced position whereby maybe we will see more models like Der Spiegel, whereby you can pay with cash or data. We will see some more changes in that regard, to the extent that cookie walls will be allowed, but they cease to be walls because you still have a choice whether you can pay with data or with cash. So that, by the fact that it gives us a choice, although I say it's arguably could be contested, it is a step forward, and that was one of the most heavily contested topics on the privacy regulation. So hopefully, and this is obviously this trend of changing the position reflects what's going on behind the scenes or with discussions about or around the privacy regulation. Now, moving on from the DPAs to what has been happening that's relevant for marketers, especially news around the cookie world. I want to address RTB just shortly. Real-time bidding, maybe most of you are aware with the term real-time bidding is these digital context whereby the publisher or owner of a website publicly bids prints on their website, so that ad tech vendors can set targeted or non-targeted advertising. Usually, with real-time bidding, the point is to get targeted advertising within a massive ecosystem of ad tech vendors that could be located globally. So RTB has been under attack already in Ireland for the past 2 years. Dr. Johnny Ryan has been at it because he alleges some infringements to some violations to data protection laws across Europe, not just in Ireland. Most notably, he speaks of the fact that through real-time bidding, we may be sharing sensitive data, which requires strict consent, and we don't know we're sharing it. Those ad tech vendors bidding for the data are still seeing the data, even if they lose the bid or if they don't really bid for the impression on the website. So this our RTB model still has a few caveats, and some authorities have been catching up with it. Lately, the Belgian Autorité de Protection des Données has issued their report about real-time bidding, specifically focused, and it's not real-time bidding, it's programmatic advertising, specifically focused on the transparency and consent framework by the IAB. Their report, in short, states, well, it was first of all, it was passed on to their litigation chamber for them to decide what's the follow-up action to the report. So the report found out that there were a few loopholes and caveats with the model. One of them they mentioned is that the IAB should be controller of all the data, to which I'm not really sure. I'll tell you about the IAB's response to that. And another reason within the report for issuing that report and sending it to the litigation chamber was that, the fact that within that context, users may be unaware that they are sharing, disclosing their personal data, and that the ad tech vendors involved may be able to see the data, even if they don't further process data for marketing, for delivering personalized ads. So this is interesting to follow because it will affect especially the marketing industry, those that rely heavily on digital advertising, especially with information obtained from third parties, meaning ad tech vendors relying on context such as the real-time bidding or transparency and consent framework by the IAB. The IAB responded to that. Obviously, first of all, this is just a report. The IAB has not been fined or sanctioned in any way yet. Hopefully, they will reach a common conclusion. The IAB has been working since they started developing the framework. They have been working closely with data protection authorities and with the industry to find the best way to deliver what the industry needs without, while still respecting the rights of the user to the highest standard. So we should follow up what's happening with the IAB in Belgium, and we should follow up across Europe to see if anyone else, in terms of data protection authorities, more than private entities, are looking into this context. Consent, as I showed in the previous screen, has also been evolving. In terms of nuanced positions on cookie walls, how to obtain consent. Implied consent is already out of the question, despite the fact that at least one or two authorities across Europe had it prior to this summer. Some trends and caveats around consents that, we still place a lot of onus on the user. The user sometimes may not understand, may not read what they need to read. Therefore, when they consent, their consent is not really meaningful if they don't know or if they don't understand, because one of the essential elements of consent is to be informed. Besides being affirmative, active action, unambiguous, they also have to understand. So this obviously gets me back to thinking, well, if I'm reading a privacy policy or if I'm not reading a privacy policy, whichever way, but if I'm reading it and I don't understand or I don't read it at all and I consent, not really protecting myself, I'm not really doing anything to control my data, that's even further troublesome to me when it comes to minors. How am I going to protect a minor if I can't understand what the implications are for me as an adult to be sharing my data on Facebook, etc.? And beyond third-party cookies, that's a topic that we will be touching upon a bit with Fergal now, with the questions he's got prepared. Just a few things that have been coming up. The iOS require for the newer devices to have all the apps will have to be accompanied by a nutrition label. So the same stoplight labels that you see on foods for saturated fats and salt, we will have to use for our apps if our apps are installed on iOS devices. For example, if you only use strictly necessary cookies and it's all anonymous, then you can have the green label, or you can have it as minimally invasive. The more invasive it is, the easier it is to identify subjects, the easier it is to follow them and track them across their online journey. Then obviously the more you have to fill up your gauge for the nutrition label, from green to red if we follow the stoplight system that they do in the real nutrition world. And then you also have limited data use that has been rolled out by Facebook as well as uh, as as well as by Apple, whereby you have or you can actively technically limit the use of the data that you have. This was, I think, first rolled out in California by Facebook as response to CCPA requirements. So there was all those who were using Facebook social plugins or anything that like Facebook logins would have to uh, actively opt people into that, into the use of Facebook data as of the 1st of August, I believe. So Facebook would have been doing it by default, just opting people out. Those people who had opted out of the sale of their personal data by default would be opted out from the Facebook data processing. However, when the Facebook gave like a month for businesses to be ready to that, and after that month, they returned all the settings to as they were, and companies manually and actively had to find out which data subjects had to be under the limited data use and which data subjects could have been sharing the data more widely. And then we have some other means of getting around. So, third-party cookies are being limited. Uh, their capacity and what we can do with the data that they gather has been limited by several browsers, most notably Chrome lately and Google. But before, this is a trend that had been followed by Firefox, Mozilla, and DuckDuckGo, and those more private browsers that they were limiting the capacity of third-party cookies to track online users' behavior on the web. But now, with Chrome following suit with this trend, so Chrome holding massive market share of 70%, I believe, or close to 70% of the market share for the digital advertising industry. It obviously is a game changer, a bigger game changer than it was when these other browsers started engaging in limiting third-party cookies. Therefore, now the industry is responding to that, trying to find workarounds that, so using local storage as opposed to cookies, albeit local storage is also under the scope of the Privacy Directive and the GDPR, as long as they process personal data, and as long as they are deploying or storing information on a user's device on HTML form or whatever form they use. Another thing that we have to keep in mind, not just how to get around the limited features that third-party cookies will be having in the next 2 years. Because as Google said, they will be phasing out slowly but surely. It's not going to be something that they will pull the rug from under our feet. We will have 2 years or 3 years to adapt to that while they develop a new way um, of gathering third-party data. In the meantime, perhaps we should focus again on the value of first-party data and new and different strategies on how to get people to trust us so that people consent and they share other data with us so we can provide them a better service, more personalized service, and at the same time, we can obviously use that data uh, as we do with the industry. I can see that.
So thank you very much for that presentation. The overall structure of what we want to do today is, following that presentation, we want to take a look at some of the questions that were submitted by attendees in advance and get into some of the detail on that. And then we will also we're also encouraging people to ask questions as we proceed. So really, the next the next piece is to move into the pre-submitted questions. So the first question that we have is in relation to the documentation and keeping of records. So what records should be kept to document cookie consent, and are these likely to change over time? So that's the first.
From a legal angle, you have to keep records of user interaction with your website when it comes to their preference. So everything that goes from opting out to consenting or withdrawing or not consenting at all, you have to keep records of how users interact with your website. And this is not just because we have Article 30 ROPA obligations, but also for you to be able to comply with some of the other obligations you need to keep an eye on when it comes to cookie consent and cookie preference or tracking technology preference. You need to keep those records. So for example, consent is bound to expire. Like you don't give consent for 99 years, or like, as it used to happen with cookies maybe 5-6 years ago. Now consent has to last, depending on where you are, from 6 to 12 months or 13 months. So if you can only really live up to that obligation, which would mean either requesting the user to reconsent or reminding them that their consent's about to expire right before. So you can only do that if you follow up. And in order to follow up, you need to know which user has consented to what. You don't need to identify personally the user. You can always use hash the IP address, or you can generate randomized IDs. But you must keep a record of every transaction so that you know when and what. Otherwise, you might risk, for example, if you remind the user frequently, well, this could be seen as nudging. Because, well, if you remind me every 5 minutes, I'm going to end up accepting so that you leave me alone, right? So you can't really comply with all the cookie obligations that we have been rolled out with an increasing level of increasingly more stringent from DPAs if we don't keep a tidy record of not just consent, but every interaction that the user has with our website in terms of their preference, whatever their preference might be. So you may call it transactions of consent or transactions of preference. I think in terms of what you need to record, it's not that much. You don't really need to get a lot of information from users to be able to show a proper CMP. So, and you obviously need to record those cookies from the CMP, whether it's yours or third party, as strictly necessary, because, well, those are the only cookies that should be dropped ideally at the beginning. So it should be simple to keep track and a record of whatever interaction you get with those 2-3 cookies you get from the CMPs that you can see around. From a technical perspective, things are bound to change, but I don't know how much this reflects what the law says so far, as much as it reflects what the market and the industry see the way these transactions of consent or preference are changing. So, for example, we are changing our own ways of of recording the transactions of our customers with their users, but it's not in a meaningful way that will change or will challenge what the law says. It's just reflecting what users were saying, what customers were saying about it. For example, if they were getting loads of noise, let's say data that they didn't really need, it was real difficult to find users and to find who did what. Therefore, we decided to change the way in which we were tracking the records of transactions, right? But it doesn't really affect in terms of what you legally are required to do. But it does. You can see that there will be some changes from a technical perspective. As it happens, technology is always ahead of the law, and most of these changes are, inconspicuous. So we don't find out from, in the legal realm, we don't really find out until everyone is doing it or it's a big change. So I don't think we can expect a lot of changes in terms of how and what you need to record in terms of tracking technologies. But you can expect to see CMPs evolving over time faster than the DPAs and the law are evolving, albeit I haven't seen anyone going against the rules, though. So it's that would be my note for that question.
Perfect. And I suppose in relation to people in different jurisdictions, they should probably look to whoever their own DPA is to kind of see what sort of guidance they give. Obviously, it varies from place to place.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, you may be recording everything that you need to record, but you may be doing it wrong because, well, if you're in France and you're using cross-device consent for analytics from third parties or for personalization, from third-party cookies, and well, yeah, you may be recording everything perfectly according to Article 30, but that's not allowed in France. So you should be you can't use cross-device consent for targeting and personalized content from third parties. So yeah, you have to keep an eye. You have to keep an eye on every. I think what you need to record is not going to change that much, but perhaps the output of how you have to show it to the authorities that could change.
Yeah, perfect. And that's helpful now. I think in the Irish situation, obviously with the sweep that occurred at during last year, and obviously a lot of people will be the DPC will be going back to some of those firms and they'll be asking them to show how they're going about being compliant. And obviously it's going to be people will need to have their paperwork in order there. Another question we have, which is kind of tangential, but I think it's important as well, is just in terms of managing the cost effectiveness of cookie compliance. So it seems to me like there's obviously a straightforward answer there, which is in one sense is to use a tool, use a CMP rather than kind of going and trying to build a load of stuff yourself. So use something that's already on the market. And I suppose there's also a sense in which you should try and reduce your interactions with the users that require consent to the ones that are really essential in order to reduce that burden. But is there any other advice there in terms of like keeping compliance kind of cost effective?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, I think using a CMP nowadays, so maybe a year ago, I would have told you, well, you can develop your own CMP. Well, you still can develop your own CMP and have it first party and have it your own, but you already have plenty in the market. They are good. We have our own CMP. You have some other competitors with their own CMPs, and you can see, well, if it's already there, it's a simple API. So why waste the time doing your own if you already you can have it out of the box today, and it will do what it needs to do in terms of compliance if you provided that you implement it adequately, right? So that from the outset, if you just take something that's already out of the box, it will save you the trouble of understanding what if let's say you don't understand really tracking technologies and what happens behind the screen of your laptop. Then, well, if you get the CMP, this will do it for you. It will classify the cookies for you. You will have everything from the outset pretty much ready to go, save a few tweaks that you will need to keep in mind for different jurisdictions if you have a global impact. But other than that, well, obviously, if you go down the road of getting getting a third-party CMP, CMPs will not tell you what to do. CMPs are not law firms, so they will. CMPs have flexibility to do pretty much whatever you want from a technical perspective. However, well, you should go about trying to implement your CMP in a sensible manner. So going, within what the law says, not trying to avoid expansive interpretations of the law, because that, in the long run, could turn easily into a compliance risk, for example. And now we see at least two DPAs that are heavily focused on sanctioning for violating cookie obligations. That's the one in Spain and the one in France. They are, and well, obviously now the Irish DPA are also quite heavily focused on tracking technology. So cost effective. Try not to reinvent the wheel. There is no point. The law is ever more clear every day. It's not the clearest to address tracking technologies, but try not to be expansive in your interpretation. And if the CMP is out of the box and you're getting best practices out of the industry, that means CMPs have seen what others are doing and have seen what has worked and what hasn't. So we have a broader overview of the industry. So take in the best practices that you get from CMPs. Do not take them as legal advice, but do take them as best practices. Obviously, always contrast with what your law or legal department says. That would be, I think, try not to go against, because I've seen several customers trying to go against what you see the rest of them doing. And so if you start rowing against, paddling against the flow, at some point you will find yourself stuck, or you will be you will be stuck with a model that doesn't really work anymore, as it did 3 or 4 years ago.
Perfect. Yeah, no, and something I think we see with a lot of our customers is when you look at the problems that they're having with compliance, a lot of them are kind of brought on by them. They've made kind of life too complex for themselves in the past. They're not taking enough care about what they're acquiring data for and how they're using it, and quite a lot of it can just be handled by, as we're cleaning house, and then actually seeing what you need to go forward with. So I have two other questions here that I think are kind of quite related, so I'm going to kind of put them together. And one is, what are the key points of compliance, and the other is how do I know if we are compliant? So obviously very, very general questions, but I think they reflect a general kind of concern and a general mood out there that this is, for even for a lot of digital marketers, there are some new kind of concepts to be grasped. There's some kind of, and they're just trying to basically get anchored in this space. Now, I know you've covered quite a lot of this stuff already, but it might be just worth just kind of, really kind of bringing out what's actually at the core, at the core of compliance. What's, that kind of real, that divider between, a kind of a good best effort at compliance and just not being in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, first of all, I think I'm not going to repeat what the law says anymore, because it's useless to use, which is step one, your checklist. Are you processing personal data? Then you need to comply with GDPR. Are you dropping cookies? Then you first of all need to comply with Article 5 of the Privacy Directive and, well, their relevant article in local legislation. But beyond that, beyond what, exactly you need, the 4 elements of consent, or what it means to actually consent or withdraw consent. But what you have to focus on is you have to go a bit beyond that checklist and think, I'm getting consent from users, but am I really giving them choice? Is it really consent what I'm getting? Or is it, or am I twisting their arm into, because, they have to get onto the website, so they'll just accept because it's the only button that I offer, which I still see plenty of around, across the EU. It's surprising to me to still see websites that they give you notice only. To me, I really don't understand, because by now, even if you're a very small company or association, you by now know that's not right. I mean, just by the fact that you see all these CMPs around the web, so everyone's giving choice, but I'm just giving them the blue accept button. So that would be number one, right? So to what extent the choice that I'm giving really is choice for the user? Because remember, the user, they want choice. We want choice, and ever more, because now we're more aware of what it means. Maybe not everyone, but increasingly, yeah. And then I would go on to double check whether what I'm telling the user, because obviously in order for you to give choice, you have to inform the user, right? So if what I'm telling the user really reflects what the website or the app is doing, because I could, copy paste if I was a one-man company and I don't have time and I don't have knowledge. So I go on the website and I screenshot whatever banner from whatever website that I see on, on the web, and I use it as my own banner. I just retype everything. Maybe, well, this will not reflect what my website is actually doing, because what I did is I just copy pasted a banner from somebody else. So maybe I'm talking about tracking technologies that I'm not even using.
Yeah.
So you have to scan your app and website, and when you scan your app and website, it doesn't stop just in the scan. So the scan, if it's a good CMP, it will classify everything for you automatically, and it will leave some tracking technologies that are not recognizable, unsure what it does. But usually you'll have all tracking technologies within your proper classification. You still need to go through it manually and see that, well, those cookies that are unknown, maybe you do know what they do, so you can manually place them wherever they need to go, whether it's third-party personalization or whether it's strictly necessary. And so that way you can still move around some of the tracking technologies that you're using in a way that really reflects what the website is doing, and not because the law says that you have to inform. And well, this is obviously, it's like the basic premise. If you inform, that means that you need to reflect what it really does. But it's also because the user wants to know, and it's the right thing to do. You want the user to engage with you. So with the cookies theme, I think one of those topics where you have to do it, yeah, because the law says, but leave the law aside. Do it because it's the right thing to do, because you want to harness trust from
Yeah.
users.
Absolutely, yeah. And it seems like that there's a lot of evidence now that obviously we're in a phase where we're seeing a lot more regulation in this activity. But I think one theory about why there is actually more movement from regulators are that there's more kind of consumer pressure. If we look at things like the adoption levels for things like ad blockers, and just there's a whole lot of markers out there. I think that you've been talking about that. People are just much more concerned with privacy concepts. So yeah, I think there is a point there, isn't there, that mere compliance is probably just not even the right way to approach it. There may be a kind of a critical kind of marketing advantage, or branding, and just general kind of strategic advantage in just taking these kind of concepts seriously and trying to do the best by your user, because that's kind of the point of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, avoid tricking the user. To me, that's number one. And it's not an easy feat. If you want to avoid tricking the user, you have to be super clear with the user, and that takes a lot of work for you to understand what cookies you have, what tracking technologies, and how to reflect them, how to inform the user in a way that they understand, in a way that's meaningful, and in short, you know.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. And another area that actually causes quite a lot of confusion, and I have a question in relation to this as well, is the social media. So about requiring cookie banners for consent for social media accounts. So this is somewhere where things kind of get, like, I think people are confused, but in a sense they're right to be confused, because the relationship between social media and say people's websites, or data controllers' websites, it's become complicated, hasn't it?
I mean, it's become to the extent that it's quite clear to me nowadays that if you're using social media plugins, you are likely to become joint controller with that social platform. Facebook or LinkedIn would be the most, but I mean, I know whatever platform social media plugin you're using, it really it puts you on the spot, because you will hardly have the bargaining chip that those social media platforms have in terms of size and what you can impose on the other party. But so it's becoming entangled, especially because a lot of us are using not just a social media plugin or the like button or stuff like that, but we are logging in to services with social media. So you log on to Amazon using Facebook or your Google email. So that is obviously we all want to harness the power contained in social media plugins and cookies and logon mechanisms. But I think we need to consider whether we really need it. Would be would we be losing anything if we don't implement it? And if we do, then well, yeah, then you have to consider from the outset what your obligations will be as joint controller, because you don't have to have the same obligations as the other one. But remember that there is still the you become obliged solidary with the joint controller. So you have to sit down and devise the panorama so that you can paint it well and limit quite clearly the responsibilities of between the social media platforms and users.
And there's a bit of an asymmetry there, because if I'm an SME and I'm becoming joint controller with Facebook, it's not really a great situation for me, because I don't really have a lot of clout, and they're kind of really setting the terms, and I could end up being on the line in a kind of a similar extent. So that is a bit of a challenge. That idea of really asking what you need to do here is an important one, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you don't really want to have, because you don't have the bargaining chip that they have. So, when it comes to that, being joint controllers with a massive organization could be a burden.
Yeah. And the last question I have, just is a kind of a general point in relation to personalization. So personalization is something that seems obviously is interlinked with cookies, because there's a kind of a strong dependence and so on. Is there a sense that kind of personalization is kind of threatened by a lot of this new regulation, or are there other things that people can consider?
I would like to respond to that from the perspective of a user, not from the perspective of a privacy counsel for OneTrust. I think from the perspective of a user, but that's me. Obviously, that doesn't reflect. I don't think that the law or complying with the law uh, will affect you negatively. It will if you do it against your will. If you do it, if you do it because you're forced into doing it, because, well, you think you don't have another choice. But in reality, all those changes, all those regulatory changes, when it comes to our preference online, if I trust you as a user, if I know that what you're telling me, what I'm reading about your technologies and what the data that you gather, if I think, well, yeah, I think because of the way it's phrased and because of the type of choice they're giving me, I think they are saying the truth. I'm going to trust you a bit, and if I'm interested in what you have to sell, I will want to get your notifications of whatever things. If I'm interested, let's say I'm interested in motorcycles, so then I really want to get, if I had my own motorcycle, I really want to get the Yamaha or Suzuki, whatever, ads, not Yamaha, but Suzuki. I really want to get every detail about, I don't know, whatever piece of equipment for the motorcycle. So if you do it properly, you will harness trust from the user. In this case, users like me. Some of the users obviously don't even think about it; they just click accept. But I'm talking about users like me who are informed. I'm not only informed that I know about the regulatory aspect, but if you harness my trust, then I'm okay. I have accepted personalization cookies from various websites, from various different services or products, because I'm interested. I kind of trust them, and I want to get what they said. I want to be informed about their newer offer or their newer guitar or the newer whatever I'm into. So the industry doesn't have to look at it as, well, now they are twisting our arm into, we have to work with limited information. No, not really. You have to get the users to trust you. You have to, and that's something I said during the first 20 minutes of the presentation. You have to think that if you step if you step in the shoes of a user, and the user starts trusting you, then you will regain the value of first party data. First party data are very valuable. The things that we lost, we kind of lost it off sight because we have third party cookies. Now we don't need to ask them, right?
Yeah.
Well, at least for the past 10 years, maybe not the past 2 years, but between 2008 and 2018, it was a free for all. So obviously, well, why mind first party data when they are reluctant to give it to me if I can get all those data from Google Analytics or social media plugins or every other third party around the web? Well, now that we have these, it's not that the law is limiting what we can do, but it's telling us how we should be doing it. If
Yeah.
that limits your ability to gather data, maybe because you're not doing it right, not because the law
Yeah.
is wrong.
Yeah, it does, and it does seem like obviously, the push away from third-party cookies. Obviously, it doesn't impact, or it has less of an impact on first-party cookies, and that kind of a strategy that looks to kind of consolidate what you need to know about your customers within your kind of within your domain and in the space that you can manage does seem like a sensible. It does seem like a sensible way to pursue these, and arguably it's maybe the way things should have been in the first place. And the kind of narrative kind of got lost somewhere along the way, and it might be a kind of a return to something that's more acceptable both to users and businesses, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in the end, if you need to monetize data somehow, pardon me, if you need to monetize data somehow, maybe you'll get a lot of value, like immediate return from third-party data. But the real gain is on first-party data when you get a user to trust you for 10 years. And obviously, that to trust you means to consent to most of the things you want to deploy in terms of tracking technologies. So it could be even that when you trust somebody on the web, you're trusting that somebody and that somebody's partners usually. So you still harness third-party data value, but maybe in the long run, engaging back with the user, with the consumer, one-to-one, as a metaphor, obviously, could be more profitable than in the long run than just the massive. Let's invade with ads, third-party cookies, personal, non-personal doesn't matter. Let's just fill this website with impressions for different ad tech vendors. To me, that's a bit overdoing it in a way that's overwhelming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's a change of attitude. So I think we've got to the end. We've got to the end of the questions, and we're also on the we're on the hour. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Ephraim, for your presentation and for talking through some of the audience questions. And hopefully people are a little bit clearer on what they need to do and how they need to think about these important concepts. Just like to thank both Arekibo and OneTrust for putting this event together, and it just remains to wish you all the best for the rest of the morning and the day, and thank you very much for attending.